Wes Craven's Shocker is one of the most ridiculous and chaotic movies that I can think of. I've often joked that if you don't like Shocker, just stick with it, because in 15 minutes it'll be a different movie. And that's not really that far off from the truth. So it probably doesn't make sense to try to come up with any sort of logic for it to follow, since it doesn't really bother to do so itself. But when your movie's this much fun, why not? And as a bonus, we're going to be checking out the locations where this one was shot. But I have to say, if I can't figure these ones out, no more Mr. Nice Guy.
Question number 1.
And for our first question, we are right here at the house that they used for the location for Jonathan's house in the movie. And this is actually right in South Pasadena. This is actually just a couple of blocks away from the Michael Myers house. And here's where we're going to ask the question, who does Horus Pinker get his powers from?
Okay, so the plot of Shocker revolves around Horus Pinker, and the guy is a serial killer who targets whole families. With the help of young Jonathan, the police are finally able to track him down and discover that he's up to some weird ritualistic stuff like animal torture, and when they finally catch him, he's slated for execution by electric chair. Right before his time is up, though, they discover him in his cell in the middle of some sort of ceremony. A strange force appears in the air and zaps him just as the cops storm into the cell and stop it all. The damage has already been done, though, since he seems to have inherited a number of powers from that bargain and can now jump from body to body and then travel through electrical waves. So there's just like a number of questions that come out of all that, but there's a smaller one in the question of exactly how he got all that stuff into his cell in the first place. Like, the guy is on death row and managed to somehow get his hands on some jumper cables, occult textbooks, black candles, and an old TV set. Well, I mean, most of that isn't so unusual, considering the occult books and candles could have just been a request, considering he was walking that last mile. And like it or not, but occult practices are still a form of religious beliefs, and he asked for those things in order to have a commune with his faith. They would likely honor that. I'm sure that they didn't really expect anything out of the ordinary or nefarious from it. And plus, there are TVs in cells, so that being there isn't weird at all. So the only thing that's really off base is the jumper cables. And I'm sure that those are simply a bribed guard away. But the real question is actually who grants him those powers in the first place. And there's not much to go on, but I've seen the ritual described as a voodoo ceremony online, and the hip casual nature of the voice seems like it would pass for like something in the 8 ladies as street lingo, indicating a more base sort of magic. And if you look at the symbols on the ground, they don't really seem to give any sort of message. I've tried to research whatever occult symbols that I could, but none of these appeared there, which likely means that they were just the work of a creative set designer with no regard to actual occult methods, but could be interpreted as being connected to a more obscure or lesser known demon. But here's my take, and it's a lot, more simplistic than that, because I'm gonna say this a few times in this episode, but I don't think Pinker was too bright. Like, yes, I think he was very cunning and clever, but not intelligent. He's a base level kind of guy, and I would imagine that his sensibilities ran a bit more to the mainstream. I think that the ritual was directed more at a general Satan or the devil. Like, Pinker seems like a sort of I only answer to the main guy sort of person, and I just don't see him as bothering with the lesser dudes. The black candles and animal sacrifices seem in line with that as well, particularly in the devil-fearing 80s, and it makes sense with the electrical-based powers as well, because you see, in the Bible, at one point it's stated that Jesus saw Satan fall as lightning, and elsewhere it stated that it was an element that God left in the hands of Satan in order to create destruction to test Job, so it's clear that the two things have an association. This is backed up a bit by the novelization of the movie, which describes the scene a bit differently. It's not a pair of lips there, and instead is described as looking like a full face with red eyes, and things that resemble horns. And I guess that can be a large number of demons, but along with everything else, it seems like it's pointing towards the big dude himself. And plus, he's got that cool lingo.
You got it, baby.
And let's face it, Satan's cool. Number 2.
Now we're outside the house that they used for the Parker family home. You just got to imagine the Pinker TV truck outside. It's just on the street from where they filmed Jonathan's house, and this is where Jonathan first met Horus in his dream. And here's what we're going to ask. Why do the people that Pinker possesses limp?
Okay, so what happens after he's electrocuted is that he develops a whole range of powers that seem to be a whole bunch of things, but are maybe just one? But the first thing that we're shown that he can do is possess people. He enters their bodies through touch, and they get a little zap, and he takes them over. But here's the thing. Before he was killed, his leg was injured, and he walked with a pronounced limp. Once he starts possessing humans in his new magical form, for some reason, they all limp as well. Like, why does this happen? He's taking over their bodies, and they don't have problems with their legs, so why would that translate? He should be able to walk just fine with their meat shells, but nope, limp. So clearly it was added in there to let the viewer know which person was possessed by Pinker and be a sort of tell. But there's a pretty reasonable explanation for it in the film as well. Remember that I said that Pinker's not that bright, and yeah, he's not really that in touch with how stuff works. And it takes him a while to figure out even how his own powers work. Like, he knows that he's made of pure electricity and later on can ride currents and satellite signals, but he doesn't realize that until the movie's almost over. So he's not really sufficient with his abilities right off the bat. He doesn't quite get them. And my theory here is that he is a creature of habit. He has a very distinct impression of what Horus Pinker is and should look like. Again, he's a pure energy creature by this point and could likely take whatever form that he wanted, like say a Barca lounger, but we'll get to that. But instead of looking however he wants, he just looks like himself. And I think it goes beyond that it's how he chooses to look. I think that he doesn't have the imagination to look different or even realize that he can. I mean, if he did, he likely wouldn't still manifest in his prison jumpsuit, although that thing does look pretty comfy, even if he looks like a taxi cab. But not only does he not realize that he could likely look however he wanted to, he doesn't realize that he has no physical form, and therefore no physical impairment such as a limp. He limps because he thinks he has to. It's completely psychosomatic at this point. It's become such a part of who he believes himself to be that he retains it. And that carries over when he takes someone over. Again, because he's kind of dumb, but crafty. Just not crafty enough to be like, oh hey, this giant bodybuilder construction guy don't need to limp. Question number 3.
After Horus goes on the run, he stays at this hotel as his hideout right here, which is located in downtown Los Angeles and looks mostly the same as it used to. And here we're going to ask the question, how does electrical powers equal bodily possession?
As I've explained, the deal that he's made with the devil is to gain this set of electricity-based powers. And that's all well and good, but then the very first set of abilities that he's showing is body-jacking people, which doesn't seem very electricity, does it? And if it did, it brings a whole new meaning to exorcism. Like now I want to make a movie where someone gets possessed, so they call in an electrician. Because why not, right? You know, Shocker says it makes sense. But there's 2 things to consider with this one. The first is that this is not a science-based set of powers. This is black magic. So it's not like this answer has to be totally scientifically or medically sound. But you knew that once I said that I was discussing Shocker anyway. So, with that in mind, just know that anything that is said after this that doesn't totally make sense can have the gaps filled in by that part being assisted by magic. The second part is that it's still sort of electrical. They make sure to show you a little shock when you take someone over, whether it's something more subtle or a more grandiose electrocution kind of thing. So that takes us to the vaguely science-related part of all of this, because our functionality depends on a certain amount of electricity in a roundabout way. Our cells are specialized to conduct electrical currents through them. Electricity is utilized by the nervous system to send signals throughout the body and to the brain, making it possible for us to move, think, and feel. Our movements are reliant upon electricity. So, Horus Pinker, being composed of pure electricity entering our body, essentially supersedes those signals. He becomes the signals, and instead of those impulses coming from our brain and such, they come from the manifestation of a limping serial killer. This is backed up by the novelization again, which flat out says that that's what he's doing, and that he's tapping into the electrical impulses of our central nervous systems. So it's clear that that was the intention all along, and not just like a weird half-baked possession concept that doesn't go with their theme. The book states that he slips into their body like a hand in a glove, which certainly adds a bit of that earlier mentioned supernatural and magical aspect to things, but it's obvious that the base intention of it being based in electricity is there. Question number 4.
A little later on, Jonathan is chased into the alleyway behind his house, and then down this pathway right here by the possessed cop, where he is then shot at. It's less green than it was back then, and it actually is right behind the house that they used for Jonathan's house. But here is where we're going to ask the question, how did electricity powers allow him to turn into a chair?
Here's how it breaks down. First off, he only realizes that his new power set lets him jump from person to person and take over their bodies. Later on in the movie, he realizes that he can do more than that, and is able to transport himself through a wall socket, riding along the electrical current. That makes sense since he's pure electricity and energy, and seems to follow suit. He's also shown to be able to travel into televisions and shows, which sort of makes sense, but we'll get into that more later. But for one moment, there's something weird that happens. Really weird. And this is a weird movie, but at least it seems to follow its own loose set of rules. But then they throw you a curveball, because as it turns out, our hero Jonathan has this reclining chair at his house. He uses it to relax in, and they establish it once or twice early on to give you the whole Chekhov's gun aspect of things. And I guess I'll explain that really quickly because it's a fun term to think about with movies. It was a writing rule by playwright Anton Chekhov, who said that every element of story should serve a necessary purpose. Therefore, if you show a gun in Act 1, someone had better shoot that gun in Act 3. Before knowing about this specific term, me and my friend Jeremy used to refer to it as the button on the forklift, named after Carnosaur 2, in which a man informs his trainee to never ever push that button on the forklift unless it's a dire emergency. And we both immediately knew that before the movie is over, that button was gonna be pushed, and pushed good. So, when they make a very distinct point to show Jonathan easing back into the chair, it sure feels like it's gonna get paid off at some later point. And it does, because after some harrowing events, our hero heads home and kicks back to relax. But, oh no! Surprise! Pinker is in the chair. And when I say he's in the chair, I mean he's possessing it. So, that sort of makes sense because it's powered by electricity, but much like a human body, he can enter into it and overwrite those signals and control it as well. I mean, logical, right? But then he actually straight up transforms the physical makeup of the chair and transforms back into himself. He mutates the chair. Now, this isn't a Freddy Dreamland or even a TV world that we'll see in a bit. This is regular reality, and electricity shouldn't allow someone to alter the form of a physical object. This is actual altering of reality here. So how does he do this? It goes against their own sort of pseudoscience explanation that they've already done, and just doesn't make sense, because this is a movie of sense and reason, damn it. But yeah, remember earlier how I said this isn't actually science of any sort? I mean, I know it's taking the form of a kind of science, since it's electricity based, but it's still a magic spell from a demon. One of the abilities it's apparently granted him is this one, the power to inhabit electrical items and physically become them. Now, you may ask yourself, that's a pretty badass thing to be able to do, and can certainly be used to a greater degree than just becoming a chair and trying to squish him. But do you remember when I said that Pinker wasn't that smart? Yeah, that. This rather OP ability in his hands. The power to get inside any electrical equipment and animate it, and even able to alter its physical makeup. And yet the most he can think of to do with it is become a chair and say,
"Just buckle, I'm just gonna kick your ass, boy."
Question number 5.
So this is an interesting location because it's just one shot, but this park is right down the street from Jonathan's house, and it's where the park chase begins. But it's miles away from the location of the rest of it. And this is actually the park that I used to bring my daughter to every day. But here we're going to ask the question, why does the necklace even affect him?
So one of the weirder plot elements of the film is the necklace, the magic necklace. Earlier in the film, while still human, Horus murders Jonathan's girlfriend, Allison, and right before he starts to attack, her bloody spirit emerges in his dreams and gives him their necklace and says it'll drive Pinker out and keep him away. Very, very shortly afterwards, the Pink makes his presence known and attacks, leading to their park confrontation. While there, Jonathan discovers that he can use the necklace to do exactly what Allison said, and it drives him out of his victims' bodies. Unfortunately, right afterwards, the necklace is thrown into a very real lake. A good portion of the remainder of the film is devoted to our boy trying to figure out how to get it from there, but in order to do so, he needs a mask. But I guess not any mask, a very, very specific one, like not just any diving mask will do, I suppose. But yeah, it's even weirder because he does make it to the lake, even though he never gets that one damn diving mask that exists in this universe. But here's the rub. That's revealed to just be a dream. He doesn't really get the very real necklace from the very real lake and wakes up, but the necklace somehow is around his neck. Some spiritual intervention from Allison. But why would a love necklace be able to disrupt electrical powers? Well, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Magic! You have to assume that since there's a demonic devil force here, that there's forces on the side of good as well, and whatever they may be are getting involved. Seems that whatever those forces are don't really want to get overly involved though, since they only send Allison down and don't really let her do much. It sure does look like she's got a lot of power, since a single blast from her glow chest is enough to take HP out of action, but then she's just like, bye, see ya, you're on your own. But here's the shocker here, pun intended I guess, and that's the fact that the necklace was never real in the first place. If you're wondering how it appeared on his neck when it was supposed to be in that lake, well, check out the earlier dream. Ghost Allison shows up and gives it to him, and then when he wakes up, it's just there in the bed. The actual, real necklace is likely buried with the real, actual Allison. This is a magical spirit totem thing imbued with the power of good, or love, or whatever it is that's the opposite of Horus Pinker. And it has enough strength in it to oppose his dark magic. Question number 6.
So now we're at the main park that they actually filmed the rest of the chase scene. It's actually about 10 miles away from the house location. So he did some teleporting there. And this is the bridge that gets a nice little highlight in the scene. And here was we're going to ask the question, did they actually go into the TV shows?
So the finale of the film shows both Jonathan and Pinker jumping into a television set. And again, highlights the magical supernatural nature of things. Because sure, Pinker can go into a TV because the electrical stuff, But Jonathan can too, using the power of the necklace, which again makes perfect sense in this movie, and we're just chalking it up to the fact that the nature of the magic necklace allows him to match Pinker's powers. But they actually go into the shows, and it's weird because they go into old war footage, but here's the thing, the soldiers actually acknowledge them as being there. He sees the beaver as well, although for some reason they don't seem to see them, nor does Alice Cooper, but they fully interact with Teshy, and Doc Frankenstein seems to see him, and they break back into the real world for a minute as well. They definitely interact with the televangelist, so there's a bit of a pattern here, but it actually seems to break it, and insinuates a pretty wild scenario for this world. You see, for all the filmed things, like Leave It to Beaver, the Alice Cooper video, and the Frankenstein bit, they don't seem to alter or react to their presence. Like sure, the doc seems to look at them running, but he does that in the actual film, so it's not like it's a varied reaction from what exists. Now, the things that they do interact with are mostly live events, the news, the televangelist, but those are events that are occurring in real time. And Jonathan and Pinker are transported into those places, although in a TV version of it. But here's where it gets freaky, because there's one outlier. In the old war footage, the soldier acknowledges their being there, which means one thing. Jonathan and Horus are actually there. They're not only in that footage, but they're a part of that landscape. And unlike the news and religious shows, it's not something that's happening live. It's in the past, which means one thing, and it's confusing to talk about. But the suggestion here is that they freaking time traveled. They time traveled into a sort of alternate TV version of these events, an alternate reality in which these events happened slightly differently, and our pair coexisted, even for a short time, with these occurrences. Question number 7.
And it's hard to peg down the actual location because, first of all, this lake is very big, and number 2, the landscape has changed quite a bit over the years. But this is roundabout where the fight with the construction worker happened, and the necklace was tossed into the lake, and this is definitely the lake that it was tossed into. And here's where we're going to ask the question, hey, why does Jonathan have to jump through the TV camera at the end?
Holy crap, this one is confusing, and it's something that it really took me a while to get my head around. Jonathan's plan is to get Pinker back to his childhood bedroom, and he has a news crew set up cameras there to facilitate this. After their jaunt through the various channels, he finally gets to the one that has a news report on it, and they appear in the room. The reporters are there, and they make a note that Pinker is really there, and this clears John John's name up from the killings. But here's where it gets confusing. The other part of the plan is to have his buddy Rhino and the other football players shut down the town's power grid, eliminating any electrical signal. Obviously, this would hurt Pinks, and since he would be trapped in the TV room, he would dissipate. Jonathan has a problem though, in that he also has to leave the room before the power goes off, or else he will be trapped there as well. When the TV is destroyed, that leaves only one way out, and that's by jumping through the TV camera, and he uses the necklace to both allow him to do it and also block Horus from doing the same. But why can't Jonathan just walk out of the room? He's flesh and blood, right? Just leave like the reporters did. And when the power is cut, then Pinker has nowhere to go, and he's dead, right? Well, I guess not, based on the fact that he didn't. And here's what I'm getting out of that. Because J-Man entered into the TV realm, he is, like Pinker, now comprised of pure electrical power. The version of him that enters the bedroom is not a flesh and blood being. He's now electricity, given that power by the forces of good that are in that necklace. So, when he appears with Pink, and they're both fighting in front of the reporters, what they're witnessing is a pair of energy avatars with no physical form. They can only exist in that room because the camera is there showing it to the world. Or I guess, the greater metropolitan area. The room is real, but they are not. If the signal is lost, then they can no longer inhabit it, as they are only allowed to be there in the first place because of its televised representation. So, for Jonathan to escape the room, he has to be solid again. And the only way to do that is to exit the room the way he came, through the signal. See, it all makes perfect, sense, right?
Oh my god, do I hate my job sometimes.
Question number 8.
This is the alley where the chase scene happens after Pinker has possessed Lieutenant Parker and is after Jonathan. And this is right behind the El Capitan Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. And this is where they actually film the Jimmy Kimmel Show. And this is where we ask, hey, how does a remote control put out a flame?
After Johnny escapes, he's outside the TV world with Pinker seemingly destroyed. But he's still talking from inside the box, though, somehow, like even though the power's out and the TV's destroyed. And then Jonathan shuts him up by clicking the remote at him, which then puts out the fire. How does the remote work on a TV that's exploded and no electricity coming through it? How does a remote work on actual freaking fire? I mean, in the book, he actually splashes water on it, so either that was changed from the script while shooting, or else the writer of the novelization saw this, said, that's stupid, and changed it. So, how does it work?
Look, this one is so ridiculous that I'm just going to say that it's a magic fire and move on.
Question number 9.
Behind me is the tower that Jonathan and Lieutenant Parker have the showdown, and Pinker broadcasts himself on the satellite. And here's where we ask the big question. Is Pinker Jonathan's real dad?
So the protagonist of the film is Jonathan Parker, and he's adopted and has never known his real family, having been raised by a police detective, Don Parker. When the rest of his family is murdered, Jonathan has a dream about it, seeing the deaths before they happen. He's able to use this psychic link to figure out Pinker's location, and the police are able to close in on him, eventually taking him down. But right before he's about to be executed, the killer reveals that he is, in fact, Jonathan's real father. He says that when he killed his mother, John attacked him, causing the leg injury that makes him limp, and then ran off, eventually being put into the foster care system. Now, the film never really tells you if that's real or not. I mean, after all, Pinker could very easily have been lying about it, a fact that's mentioned by Don a little later on. It's possible that he was just trying to get under his skin, one last dig before being put to death, and leaving it hanging over his head as a constant question. The insinuation is that Pinker had known that Jonathan was his son all along and chose the Parkers as specific victims, killing them for taking his son away. That seems to be the case as well, because when we see the dream of it happening, Pinker's first reaction to seeing Jonathan walking in is,
What are you doing here, dipshit?
He then goes on to egg him on and asked if he wanted to watch. Now, if he had no clue who he was, I think his more likely response would be, who are you? Rather than, what are you doing here? That seems to indicate that he knew who he was but wasn't expecting him there, and whereas I don't think it can be seen as definitive, it seems pretty likely. But then the movie gets confusing because it shows Horus in the hotel room, and he's looking at a newspaper article about Jonathan and watching a report about him on TV, and it seems like he's getting his information about him from there. Almost like it's insinuating that he didn't know who this kid was who ratted him out, but was learning about him from this stuff and would now hunt him down. Again, the movie doesn't stand one way or the other, and it ends with J-Man flat out realizing that it doesn't really matter if Pinker really is his father, because he's his own man now, and ultimately the question isn't relevant, and because of this, the movie doesn't want to answer it either, because that is the point. Jonathan is Don's kid at this point, as he's the one who raised him and instilled his values into him, and not whatever Pinker did. So that's what it gives you, but that doesn't mean that we can't wonder about it. So here's where I stand on the matter. I think it makes way more sense for him to be the actual father, based solely on the psychic link. Jonathan is given that dream for a reason, and it's not just to save his family, considering that later on he's able to use another dream to locate Pinker attacking some other random family. He's connected in some way, and the family link makes the most sense. And I said sense in context with Shocker, so you know how far gone I am at this point. But what I don't think, though, is that Pinker targeted his family in specific. Killing families was his MO, and he had done it before, and as we see in the film, something he plans to continue doing. He's not just singling the Parkers out, they were just someone he chose. Now, he had killed multiple people before this, but Jonathan had never had a vision about any of them. So here's what I think happened. When Pinker goes after his family, it activates whatever kind of a link the two have, and he's able to dreamwalk to the scene of the crime. Now, at this point, I don't think that Pinker knows that this family belongs to his son, but I think that he is aware of him. I think that look he gives and the "what are you doing here" is him recognizing that this is his kid, and he is surprised to see him at this killing that he has instigated. I don't think he's aware of what happened to his son after their last confrontation when he was younger. That scene with him getting information about Jonathan from the paper is him figuring out where his boy has been and where he is now, indicating that he hasn't been tracking or following him all those years. Question number 10.
And we end where we began, right back at Jonathan's house, where he walked out to look up into the stars. And yeah, we're going to ask our final question here. Whatever happened to the idea of a sequel?
Shocker was clearly intended as a new take on Nightmare on Elm Street, and Horus Pinker was carefully crafted to be a new franchise star and the next Freddy Krueger. Hell, look at how similar the film's intros are to each other. In spite of that, though, there was never any other entries. That was probably due to its lukewarm reaction at the box office. It still made around $16 million, which I contributed to because I saw this sucker twice in the theaters, and I made my dad come with me to see it one time, and let me tell you, that guy doesn't really like horror movies, and Horus Pinker did not impress him. But it only cost $5 million to make, so it was fairly successful, but it was nowhere near the level that they were hoping for in order to build a series on. Besides that, the reaction of viewers was mediocre as well, as folks weren't really clamoring for more of this weird, jangled up, amazing mess of a wonderful film. So, no more entries were to follow, although a long time later, Jonathan Parker actor Peter Berg, who had since gone on to become a pretty big-name director, joked about making a remake or sequel where he would also play Horus Pinker, although it's clear that he was not serious about this. The makers of the video game The Suffering were apparently fans since they made their main character a guy who was electrocuted, and his name was also Horus, but Horace Gage, and he has a very different backstory, so it's not exactly a sequel or anything. But in 1992, 2 years after the first film, an author named Nicholas Grabowski was working with Wes Craven on novelizations of his works. With his interest piqued, Craven challenged a writer to come up with a sequel to Shocker, which he did, writing out a 38-page treatment for what would be Shocker 2. In it, we find out that after Pinker was seemingly destroyed, Jonathan continued to dream about him, and was pressed by government officials for more information about what exactly happened, and the ensuing investigation to discover his secrets of life after death. A professor with a passion for the occult named Julian Blackwell gets involved and acts as the main character of this one, and they go into a sort of an alternate mythology for Pinker. In this, they say that he got his power from an ancient race called the Yazidism, a dark religion that allows its users to invoke abilities after death that would tie to their characteristics in life, hence TV repairman Pinker's electrical powers. They find that Pinker is not quite dead and is in limbo, waiting to return, and Blackwell is determined to make sure that he's cast into hell, instead accidentally restoring him to our world. Jonathan does factor in, but he's relegated to a side character role here, and it ends with Blackwell merging with Pinker and banishing them both to hell, the professor sacrificing himself to end Horus's reign of terror. Grabowski himself said that the reason Craven didn't follow through and try to get into development with it is because he instead chose to follow a very different and screamy direction, so this version of Pinker never came to be, and we only have this one wacky, confusing hour and a half of solid fun.
So there you have it, 10 questions about Shocker and a bunch of the locations that the film was shot at. I hope you enjoyed those questions. I know that Shocker is not the biggest, most exciting movie, but I happen to really enjoy it. I thought I had a lot of questions about it, so I thought it'd be kind of fun to do this and answer these. If you enjoyed this and you liked these answers, let me know down below in the comments. If you have other questions about Shocker, let's hear those ones as well too. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you enjoyed the channel, hit the subscribe button and hit the notification so you know when new videos come up. And if you think about it, go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines, where you can help support this channel and help me, keep going to more locations. But thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you soon. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.